My sister abandoned my wedding day to have a surprise ceremony with my husband's cousin, someone she barely knew, for 2 weeks. Months later, she showed up in tears asking me to help her legally fight against her husband, who she finally realized was a manipulative drug user and compulsive liar. Everyone, I'm Jessica, and I need to tell you about the most shocking betrayal I've ever experienced in my life. It involves my younger sister Amy, my wedding day, and a series of events so unbelievable that I'm still processing them months later. This story has everything: family drama, impulsive decisions, lies, addiction, and the most awkward family dynamics you can imagine. Let me start with some background. Amy is my younger sister by 3 years, and we've always had a complicated relationship. She's the type of person who makes impulsive decisions and then expects everyone else to clean up the mess. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. Good grades, followed the rules, planned ahead. Amy was the wild child who lived for the moment and never thought about consequences. Despite our differences, I loved her deeply and always tried to protect her from her own bad choices. When I got engaged to my now husband Daniel 2 years ago, Amy seemed genuinely happy for me. She agreed to be my maid of honor and even helped with some of the wedding planning, though her attention span for details was pretty limited. Daniel has a large extended family, and during our engagement party 18 months ago, Amy met several of his cousins for the first time, including his cousin Ryan. Ryan was 28, charming in a reckless kind of way, and had just moved back to town after what he claimed was traveling abroad for work. He was good-looking, had this mysterious air about him, and told fascinating stories about his adventures in different countries. Amy was immediately smitten. They spent most of the engagement party talking, laughing, and I could see that familiar look in her eyes, the same look she got before every impulsive decision that ended badly. After the party, Amy couldn't stop talking about Ryan. She asked me a million questions about him, wanted to know if Daniel could arrange for them to hang out, and basically became obsessed overnight. I tried to warn her to take things slow, but Amy has never listened to advice, especially from her boring older sister, as she liked to call me. Over the next few months leading up to my wedding, Amy and Ryan started seeing each other casually. Daniel didn't know Ryan very well since they weren't particularly close as cousins, but from what little he knew, Ryan had always been somewhat unreliable. He'd had various jobs over the years, moved around a lot, and had a reputation for being charming but flaky. Still, he seemed harmless enough, and I was too busy with wedding planning to pay much attention to Amy's love life. The red flags started appearing about a month before my wedding. Amy began acting secretive and distracted. She missed to dress fittings, barely participated in my bachelorette party, and seemed more interested in texting on her phone than helping with last-minute wedding preparations. When I confronted her about it, she brushed me off, saying she was just busy and that I was being too controlling about everything. 2 weeks before my wedding, Amy's behavior became even more erratic. She started talking about how traditional weddings were outdated and how people should just follow their hearts instead of worrying about what society expected. She made several comments about how my wedding was too formal and too planned and how real love doesn't need all this ceremony. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual rebellious self, but looking back, I realized she was trying to justify something to herself. The week before my wedding was when things really went off the rails. Amy became increasingly difficult to reach. She'd respond to texts hours late with vague answers, and when I tried to call her about final maid of honor duties, she seemed distracted and kept cutting conversations short. The day before my wedding, during our rehearsal, she seemed nervous and kept looking at her phone. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she had a lot on her mind but wouldn't elaborate. Then came my wedding day, what should have been the happiest day of my life. I woke up early, excited and nervous, ready to marry the love of my life, surrounded by family and friends. Amy was supposed to arrive at the bridal suite at 9 a.m. to start getting ready with me and my other bridesmaids. 9 o'clock came and went. No Amy. I texted her, no response. Called her, straight to voicemail. By 10:30, I was starting to panic. My other bridesmaids were trying to stay positive, suggesting that maybe she overslept or had car trouble. But I knew something was seriously wrong. Amy might be irresponsible, but she wouldn't just disappear on my wedding day without explanation. Finally, at 11 a.m., just 3 hours before the ceremony, I received a text message that I will never forget as long as I live. Jess, I'm so sorry, but I can't be at your wedding today. Ryan and I decided to get married this morning. We drove to Vegas last night. I know this seems crazy, but when you know, you know. We didn't want to wait and we wanted it to be just us. I hope you understand. Love you. I literally dropped my phone. My bridesmaids gathered around me, reading the message over my shoulder, and the room fell completely silent. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My sister, my maid of honor, had abandoned my wedding day to elope with a man she had known for exactly 14 days with someone she barely knew. The next few hours were a blur of emotions. Hurt, betrayal, confusion, anger. I cycled through them all while trying to maintain some semblance of composure on what was supposed to be my special day. My mother was devastated and kept calling Amy, but her phone was turned off. My father was furious, muttering about how Amy had finally gone too far this time. Daniel was supportive but clearly shocked, especially since Ryan was his cousin and hadn't mentioned anything about this plan. I had to make a choice. Let Amy's betrayal ruin my wedding day, or find a way to move forward. With the help of my amazing bridesmaids, I decided to continue with the ceremony. One of my friends stepped in as a replacement maid of honor, and we proceeded as planned. The wedding was beautiful, but there was definitely a cloud hanging over the celebration. Guests kept asking where Amy was, and we had to keep explaining that she had a family emergency rather than admit the truth. During the reception, Daniel's family was buzzing with confusion about Ryan's sudden disappearance and marriage. Apparently, he had told various family members different stories about where he was going that weekend, and no one had any idea about his elopement plans. His own parents were shocked and hurt that he hadn't told them anything. It became clear that this impulsive decision had blindsided everyone, not just me. For the next 2 weeks, while Daniel and I were on our honeymoon, Amy was radio silent. She didn't respond to calls, texts, or emails from anyone in the family. Her social media went quiet too, which was unusual for someone who normally documented every meal and outfit online. When we returned from our honeymoon, I tried reaching out again, but still nothing. I was hurt, confused, and honestly, part of me was ready to write her off entirely. About a month after my wedding, Amy finally resurfaced. She called me one evening, and her voice sounded different, subdued, almost hollow. She apologized for missing the wedding and said she hoped I could forgive her, but she didn't really explain her actions or seem to understand the magnitude of what she had done. She mentioned that married life was an adjustment and that Ryan was different than she expected, but when I pressed for details, she became vague and changed the subject. Over the next few months, I heard bits and pieces about Amy and Ryan through mutual friends and family. They had moved into a small apartment together, but Amy seemed isolated from her usual social circle. The few times people saw them together, Ryan appeared controlling and possessive, barely letting Amy speak for herself. When family members tried to visit or invite them to gatherings, Ryan always seemed to have an excuse for why they couldn't attend. The truth started to emerge slowly, like pieces of a horrible puzzle falling into place. Daniel's aunt mentioned that Ryan had borrowed money from several family members, claiming he was waiting for a big work contract to come through. A friend of Amy's told me she had seen Ryan at a bar in the middle of a weekday, clearly intoxicated and acting erratically. Another cousin mentioned that Ryan had been asking a lot of questions about various family members' financial situations and work schedules, but the real revelation came 6 months after Amy's elopement on a rainy Tuesday evening when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened the door to find Amy standing on my porch, and I barely recognized her. She had lost weight, her usually perfect hair was unkempt, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame. But it was her eyes that shocked me the most. They looked hollow, defeated, like she had aged years in just a few months. "Jess," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help." I let her in, made her some tea, and waited for her to explain. What she told me over the next 2 hours was more disturbing than I could have imagined. Ryan, it turned out, was not the charming adventurer he had pretended to be. His traveling abroad for work had actually been a stint in rehab for cocaine addiction, and his mysterious stories were complete fabrications. He had been unemployed for over a year and had been living off money borrowed from various sources. The signs had been there from the beginning, Amy admitted, but she had been so caught up in the romance and excitement of their whirlwind relationship that she had ignored every red flag. Ryan had love-bombed her during those 2 weeks before their elopement, telling her she was his soulmate, that they were meant to be together, that conventional relationships were for people who didn't understand true love. He had convinced her that getting married immediately was romantic and spontaneous, not reckless and impulsive. After their Vegas wedding, the mask had started to slip almost immediately. Ryan became possessive and controlling, monitoring her phone calls and social media, isolating her from friends and family. He had no steady income but expected Amy to support them both while he pursued various business opportunities that never materialized. She discovered drug paraphernalia hidden in their apartment and realized he was still using. When she confronted him, he became verbally abusive and manipulative, alternating between rage and tearful apologies. The final straw had come the week before Amy showed up at my door. She had discovered that Ryan had been forging her signature on various financial documents, including a loan application using her credit and a withdrawal from her savings account. When she confronted him about it, he had threatened her and disappeared for 3 days, returning home high and aggressive. That's when Amy realized she needed to get out. "I know I hurt you," Amy said through tears, "and I know I ruined your wedding day. I've been so ashamed and embarrassed that I couldn't face anyone. But I'm scared, Jess. I need help getting away from him legally. I want to file for divorce and press charges for the financial fraud, but I don't know how, and I can't afford a lawyer. I know I have no right to ask after what I did, but you're the only person I trust who might know what to do." I sat there looking at my sister, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I was still hurt and angry about my wedding day, but seeing her so broken and desperate, I couldn't turn her away. This was my little sister, and despite everything, I loved her. Over the next few days, I helped Amy find a lawyer who specialized in domestic abuse cases and financial fraud. We gathered evidence of Ryan's forged documents, his drug use, and his threats. Amy moved back in with our parents temporarily while the legal proceedings began. The lawyer explained that Amy had grounds for both divorce and criminal charges, but it would be a complicated process since Ryan had been careful to cover his tracks in some areas. The investigation revealed that Amy wasn't Ryan's first victim. He had a pattern of targeting vulnerable women, using charm and fake stories to gain their trust, then financially and emotionally exploiting them. There were at least 2 other women who had similar experiences with him, and the police were building a case for multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. During this time, I struggled with my own feelings about the situation. Part of me felt vindicated that my instincts about Ryan had been correct, and that Amy's impulsive decision had predictably backfired. But mostly, I felt sad for my sister and guilty that I hadn't tried harder to protect her from her own poor judgment. Amy and I had several long conversations about what had happened. She acknowledged that her decision to elope on my wedding day was inexcusable and that she understood why I was hurt and angry. She explained that Ryan had been pressuring her to choose between him and her family, framing my wedding as a test. of her loyalty to him. In her confused state, she had believed his manipulation and thought that proving her love by missing my wedding would somehow validate their relationship. I was so caught up in this fantasy of spontaneous, passionate love that I lost sight of everything else, Amy admitted. I thought traditional things like your wedding were boring and meaningless compared to what Ryan and I had, but I realize now that I threw away something real and important for something that was completely fake. The legal process took several months, but eventually, Amy was able to get her divorce and recover most of the money Ryan had stolen. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, and during his trial, more victims came forward. He eventually pled guilty and received a sentence of 3 years in prison. Throughout this ordeal, Amy and I slowly began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. I had to work through my feelings of betrayal and hurt, and Amy had to accept responsibility for the pain she had caused not just me, but our entire family. We attended some family counseling sessions together, which helped us communicate better and establish healthier boundaries. Amy also entered individual therapy to address her pattern of impulsive decision-making and her vulnerability to manipulation. She recognized that her need for excitement and validation had made her an easy target for someone like Ryan, and she wanted to develop better judgment and self-awareness. Today, almost a year later, Amy and I have a better relationship than we've had in years. She has moved into her own apartment, found a stable job, and is slowly rebuilding her life. She still struggles with the consequences of her choices, the embarrassment, the financial impact, the damage to some family relationships, but she's working hard to make amends and move forward. The experience taught me a lot about family, forgiveness, and the complexity of human relationships. Amy's betrayal on my wedding day was devastating, and I don't think I'll ever completely get over the hurt of that moment. But seeing her so broken and desperate also reminded me that people we love sometimes make terrible decisions, and that doesn't necessarily mean we have to cut them out of our lives entirely. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing someone's behavior, but it can mean choosing to maintain a relationship despite being hurt. It also doesn't mean returning to the exact same dynamic we had before. Amy and I have had to establish new boundaries and rebuild trust slowly. Looking back, I wish I had been more assertive about my concerns regarding Ryan, but I also recognize that Amy probably wouldn't have listened anyway. She needed to learn this lesson the hard way, and unfortunately, her learning process caused collateral damage to our family relationships. The whole experience also made me appreciate my husband Daniel even more. Throughout Amy's crisis, he was supportive and understanding, even though his cousin's actions had embarrassed his family as well. He helped me navigate my conflicted feelings and supported my decision to help Amy when she asked for it. As for Amy, she's dating someone new now, a kind, stable man she met through work. They've been taking things very slowly, and Amy has been completely transparent with our family about their relationship. She's learned to value consistency and honesty over excitement and drama, which is a huge growth for her. The wedding day betrayal will always be a painful memory, but it's no longer the defining moment of my relationship with Amy. Instead, it's become a turning point that led to both of us growing and understanding each other better. Sometimes the worst experiences in our lives can ultimately lead to stronger relationships. Even though the process is difficult and painful, I still think Amy made a terrible, selfish decision that hurt our entire family, but I'm glad she was brave enough to ask for help when she realized her mistake. And I'm proud of myself for being able to help her despite my hurt feelings. Family is complicated, but sometimes that complication is what makes it worth fighting for.